Every Christmas, my son told me I was the reason our family could never enjoy the holidays. According to him, I complained too much, dressed too simply, and made everyone uncomfortable by asking who was paying for things. So this year, when he secretly used my credit card to book a $40,000 Caribbean cruise for himself, his wife, and 11 members of her family, I decided not to argue. I let him believe everything was going according to plan. I waited until they were standing inside the cruise terminal with their designer luggage, champagne packages, and priority boarding passes. Then, I cancelled every cabin while they were boarding. The first panicked call reached me at exactly 11:17 in the morning. My name is Walter Hayes. I am 70 years old, and until last December, I believed there was no humiliation a father should not endure to keep his family together. I was wrong. Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Subscribe to Mark Cole if you believe respect should never disappear simply because a parent grows older. For 34 years, I worked at the Naval Shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia. I began as an apprentice electrician when I was 19 and retired as the senior electrical maintenance supervisor. I spent most of my adult life crawling through steel compartments, repairing burned control panels, testing high-voltage systems, and standing inside engine rooms so hot that sweat soaked through my coveralls before breakfast. The work was dangerous, loud, and unforgiving. A careless decision could shut down an entire vessel. A single loose connection could start a fire behind a wall where nobody would notice until smoke filled the passageways. I learned early that problems rarely announced themselves with dramatic warnings. Most disasters began quietly. A faint smell, a flickering light, a number on a meter that did not look quite right. My late wife, Elaine, used to say that I could hear trouble before it happened. She was probably right. Elaine and I built a modest but comfortable life. We bought a 3-bedroom waterfront house outside Norfolk when prices were still reasonable. It was not a mansion, but it had a wide porch, a sturdy dock, and a clear view of the Elizabeth River. Every board in that house carried a memory. I installed the kitchen cabinets myself. Elaine planted the magnolia tree near the front steps. Our son, Nathan, learned to swim from the end of the dock. When Nathan wanted to attend a private university in Washington, I volunteered for every holiday shift the shipyard offered. I worked Christmas Eve, New Year's Day, and more Sunday mornings than I can remember. Elaine took bookkeeping jobs from home. Together, we paid his tuition, his apartment, his textbooks, and his first car. Nathan graduated without $1 of student debt. I considered that one of the proudest achievements of my life. After Elaine died from ovarian cancer, the house became painfully quiet. Nathan was already married by then. His wife, Vanessa, came from a family that treated luxury like a basic human requirement. Vanessa's father, Richard, had spent his career selling commercial property. Her mother, Diane, belonged to 2 private social clubs and spoke about people's neighborhoods as if she were reviewing their character. Vanessa's 2 sisters were exactly like her. They wore expensive clothes, took carefully staged vacations, and measured success by how jealous strangers became when they looked at photographs online. At first, I tried not to judge them. People were raised differently. That was what Elaine would have said. Vanessa never openly insulted me during the first years of the marriage. She was more careful than that. Her cruelty arrived disguised as concern. She would look around my living room and ask whether I had considered hiring an interior designer. She would glance at my flannel shirts and suggest that Nathan take me shopping. She once asked whether the smell of the river ever lowered the property value. Whenever I cooked dinner, she photographed the food but rarely ate it. She would push the plate around with her fork and announce that she was avoiding carbohydrates, sodium, dairy, processed ingredients, or whatever category my meal happened to contain. Nathan noticed everything, but he never defended me. Instead, he adapted himself to her standards. The boy, who once wore muddy sneakers and ate sandwiches on the dock, began correcting my pronunciation of restaurant names. He started arriving in leased European cars and wearing watches that cost more than I earned during my first year at the shipyard. He also started asking for money. At first, the requests were small. $5,000 to help with a business opportunity, $8,000 to cover an unexpected tax payment, $10,000 because Vanessa needed surgery that insurance supposedly would not cover. I gave him the money because I was his father. I told myself that parents helped their children when they could. The requests never stopped. Nathan always had a reason. He was waiting for a commission. A client had delayed payment. The market had shifted. A partner had made a mistake. Every explanation was temporary, and every temporary crisis somehow required access to my permanent savings. I began to notice that the emergencies were followed by vacations, new furniture, expensive dinners, and photographs of Vanessa holding shopping bags. I questioned Nathan once. He became deeply offended. He told me I had no idea how expensive modern life had become. He accused me of judging him by outdated standards. Then he reminded me that I had promised Elaine I would always take care of the family. Using his mother's memory ended the conversation exactly as he intended. The Christmas cruise began with an envelope from my credit card company. It arrived on the first Monday of December. I had spent the morning repairing a loose railing near the dock. The air was cold enough to sting my hands, and a grey mist hung over the river. I came inside, made coffee, and sorted through the mail at the kitchen table. Most of it was ordinary. A utility bill, a local newspaper, a charity request. Then I opened the credit card statement. The balance printed near the top of the first page was $40,286. For several seconds, I assumed I was reading the wrong account. I had used that card twice during the month. Once for groceries and once to replace the battery in my truck. My total spending should have been less than $400. I moved my finger down the page. There was one enormous transaction from an elite cruise travel agency in Miami. The description read, Christmas Caribbean Signature Voyage. Amount charged, $39,875. A smaller charge beneath it covered premium travel insurance. I sat perfectly still. The kitchen clock clicked behind me. A tugboat moved slowly down the river outside the window. I read the number again. Then I picked up my phone and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. Dad, I'm in the middle of something. I asked him why almost $40,000 had been charged to my credit card. There was a brief silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone deciding which lie to use. Nathan exhaled sharply and told me not to panic. He said the charge was for the family Christmas cruise he had mentioned several weeks earlier. I reminded him that he had never asked permission to use my card. His voice hardened immediately. He accused me of turning every family celebration into a financial interrogation. He said Vanessa had spent months organizing the perfect Christmas and that everyone was already excited. He told me canceling would embarrass him in front of her parents. I repeated the only fact that mattered. He had charged nearly $40,000 to my account without asking. Nathan raised his voice. He told me I had more than enough money. He said I was sitting alone in a paid-off house while my family was trying to create meaningful memories. He accused me of valuing numbers on a bank statement more than time with my own son. Then he used Elaine. He said his mother would have loved the idea. He claimed Elaine had always dreamed of taking the whole family on a Christmas cruise. He said refusing to pay would dishonor her memory. I looked across the kitchen toward the photograph of Elaine standing beside the magnolia tree on our 40th anniversary. She was smiling in a simple blue dress, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. Elaine had never dreamed about luxury cruises. She became seasick on ferry boats. Nathan knew that. He was not remembering his mother. He was using her grave as a credit card authorization. I told him I needed the complete booking information. Nathan's tone softened slightly. He probably believed he had won. He said he would email the itinerary. Then he added that I needed to pack formal clothes because the cruise line enforced a strict dress code in several restaurants. He warned me not to bring my old brown dinner jacket because Vanessa thought it looked dated. Before I could respond, he ended the call. I remained at the table with the statement in front of me. My anger did not arrive as heat. It arrived as coldness. 34 years in a shipyard had trained me not to touch live equipment while emotional. Panic caused mistakes. Anger caused shortcuts. The first rule was always the same. Understand the system before you interfere with it. 12 minutes later, my laptop chimed. Nathan had sent the itinerary. The email subject read, "Christmas cruise details. Please read carefully." I opened the attachment. The ship was one of the newest luxury vessels operating from Miami. It had private restaurants, rooftop pools, a theater, a casino, and something called an exclusive retreat deck, available only to suite passengers. Nathan had reserved 4 large oceanfront suites. The guest list included Nathan and Vanessa, her parents, both of her sisters, their husbands, 3 adult cousins, and Vanessa's closest friend. 11 people from Vanessa's side of the family. I searched for my name. Walter Hayes appeared on page 7. I had not been assigned to one of the suites. My reservation was an interior cabin on the lowest passenger deck, directly across from the ship's laundry facility. No window, no balcony, no access to the retreat deck. The package notes stated that I would dine during the early seating period at a standard restaurant, while the suite guests had reservations at private venues. I had paid almost $40,000 for a family vacation where I had been deliberately separated from the family. That alone should have ended the matter. But Nathan had made a mistake. He had forwarded the travel agent's message instead of creating a new email. Beneath the official itinerary was the entire conversation between him, Vanessa, and the agent. I began reading. Vanessa complained that the original cabin assignment placed me too close to their suites. She wrote that she did not want me wandering into their photographs wearing shipyard clothes. She said my presence made every event feel cheap. She asked whether the cruise line could arrange for me to dine separately because her parents found my stories about manual labor depressing. Nathan assured her I would stay out of the way. He wrote that I would probably spend most of the trip sleeping or sitting alone. Then Vanessa asked whether my card could also cover a private photography package. She wanted coordinated family portraits on Christmas morning. The photographer had been instructed to photograph the immediate family only. My name was not included. I had funded the voyage, the suites, the alcohol, the dining, the excursions, and the photographs. But I was not considered immediate family. I continued scrolling. The conversations became worse. Vanessa said the cruise would be a useful opportunity to document my confusion. Nathan replied that being outside my normal environment could help them establish a pattern. They discussed taking photographs if I became lost on the ship. They planned to tell crew members that I had memory problems. Vanessa suggested hiding my cabin card and then recording me when I could not open the door. Nathan wrote that after the cruise, they could use those incidents during the guardianship hearing. My hand stopped moving on the mouse. I read the sentence again. Guardianship hearing. A later email included a list of tasks. Obtain updated medical records. Contact elder care attorney. Document forgetfulness. Review waterfront property valuation. Secure control before spring. They were not simply stealing money for a vacation. The cruise was part of a larger plan. They intended to create evidence that I could no longer care for myself. Once they returned, Nathan planned to petition the court for control over my finances and medical decisions. My waterfront house was the target. The house had increased dramatically in value. Developers had purchased several nearby properties and replaced them with luxury homes. Nathan often mentioned that I was sitting on dead equity. I had always believed he was offering financial advice. Now I understood. He wanted the house sold. He needed me removed before I could object. The cruise would provide the performance. A confused old man wandering through an unfamiliar ship, concerned relatives gathering evidence, a loving son reluctantly accepting responsibility. It was a carefully designed story. They had already decided my role. I was the failing father. Nathan was the heroic caregiver. Vanessa was the patient daughter-in-law. And once I was locked inside a facility, they would gain access to everything Elaine and I had spent our lives building. The laptop screen illuminated the kitchen, while the afternoon faded outside. I did not shout. I did not call Nathan back. I did not confront Vanessa. A confrontation would only warn them. Instead, I printed every email. I printed the itinerary, the cabin assignments, the comments about my clothes, the photography instructions, and every reference to guardianship. The printer worked for nearly 20 minutes. Page after page slid into the tray. When it finished, I organized the documents by date and placed them inside an old shipyard inspection binder. The binder was red. At the shipyard, red binders were reserved for critical system failures. That seemed appropriate. I was closing the laptop when another notification appeared. It came from my bank. A withdrawal of $7,500 had been made from a joint emergency account I shared with Nathan. I had opened that account shortly after his marriage. It was meant for medical emergencies or unemployment. I had funded every dollar. The transaction had been completed at a luxury luggage store in Washington. $7,500. I called the bank's automated line and listened to the recent activity. There were additional purchases: designer coats, formal clothing, travel accessories, a limousine service from Washington to the airport. They were not only forcing me to pay for the cruise, they were using my emergency savings to dress themselves for it. I closed my eyes and pictured Elaine sitting across from me at the kitchen table. During her final months, she worried about Nathan constantly. She made me promise not to let grief separate us. I had confused loyalty to her memory with permission for Nathan to abuse me. Elaine had asked me to love our son. She had never asked me to surrender my dignity. That night, I slept for less than 2 hours. At 4 a.m, I walked into the spare bedroom that had once belonged to Nathan. I opened the closet and pulled down a small metal lockbox containing Elaine's personal papers and jewelry. The key turned easily. Inside were her wedding ring, several handwritten letters, a silver bracelet, and an empty space where a green velvet case should have been. My stomach tightened. The missing case had contained Elaine's sapphire necklace. I bought it for our 30th anniversary, after saving overtime pay for nearly a year. The stone was not enormous, but it was deep blue and surrounded by small diamonds. Elaine wore it only on special occasions. After she died, I placed the necklace in the lockbox. I intended to give it to Nathan's future daughter, if he ever had one. If he did not, I planned to donate it to a charity auction supporting cancer patients. The velvet case was gone. I examined the lockbox carefully. There were no signs of forced entry. Nathan knew where I kept the spare key. He had helped me organize documents after Elaine's funeral. I checked the security camera application on my phone. The camera covering the hallway had been disconnected for several hours the previous Saturday. Nathan had visited that afternoon while I was repairing a neighbor's boat motor. He told me he needed to use my printer. The timeline was obvious. My son had entered my house, opened the box containing his mother's possessions, and stolen her necklace. I searched local pawn and jewelry databases online, but found nothing. Then I remembered a comment Vanessa had made during Thanksgiving dinner. She had admired a new diamond bracelet worn by her sister and said she would soon have something even more impressive. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the empty velvet case. The house felt different. For decades, it had been a place of safety. Now I knew a thief had walked through the rooms using a key I gave him. The thief was my son. At 7 in the morning, I showered, shaved, and put on my cleanest work jacket. I gathered the red binder, the bank statements, photographs of the empty jewelry case, and copies of the security camera outage. Then, I drove into downtown Norfolk. My destination was the law office of Margaret Sloan. Margaret had handled Elaine's estate. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the patient voice of someone who had spent decades listening to families lie about one another. Her office overlooked the harbor. Through the windows, I could see cranes moving above the shipyard, where I had spent most of my life. Margaret entered the conference room carrying coffee. She smiled and asked how retirement was treating me. I placed the red binder on the table. I told her retirement had become complicated. For the next 30 minutes, she read. Her expression changed slowly. The professional warmth disappeared. She reached the messages about manufactured confusion and stopped turning pages. "Did Nathan ever ask you to sign a power of attorney?" she asked. 2 years earlier, I had suffered a minor heart rhythm problem. Nathan came to the hospital and acted deeply concerned. He said we needed paperwork allowing him to make decisions if I became unconscious. I signed a medical power of attorney and a broad financial authorization. At the time, it seemed responsible. Now the documents felt like loaded weapons pointed directly at me. Margaret asked whether Nathan had copies. I told her he did. She stood up, walked to her desk, and called 2 members of her legal team. Within minutes, the quiet consultation became an emergency operation. Margaret explained that we needed to revoke every authority Nathan possessed. The revocation had to be documented, witnessed, notarized, and delivered to my banks, doctors, insurance providers, hospital networks, investment companies, and the county clerk. I asked how quickly it could be done. She looked at the crew's departure date. 9 days remained. "Today," she said. I signed document after document. Each signature removed another piece of control from Nathan's hands. Margaret prepared formal notices stating that my son had no permission to access my financial records, make medical decisions, enter my property, or communicate on my behalf. She recommended changing every lock at the house and disabling all old access codes. She also insisted that I undergo a complete independent mental competency evaluation. Not because she doubted me, because Nathan's plan depended on creating doubt. We would eliminate that possibility before he knew I had discovered anything. That afternoon, I spent nearly 5 hours with a geriatric psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a licensed cognitive specialist. They tested memory, reasoning, language, attention, financial understanding, and decision-making ability. I remembered lists of words. I solved number patterns. I explained my investments. I described exactly why I wanted to revoke Nathan's authority. The examinations were exhausting, but I welcomed every question. At the end, the psychiatrist told me my cognitive performance was above average for my age. He signed a detailed report declaring me fully competent and capable of independently managing my personal, medical, legal, and financial affairs. Margaret filed the report with the appropriate court. Nathan had planned to build a false paper trail. We built a real one first. The next morning, Margaret brought in a forensic accountant named Samuel Price. Samuel was a narrow-faced man who spoke very little. He spent hours examining public records, business filings, property liens, and financial connections linked to Nathan and Vanessa. By late afternoon, he had created a picture of their real life. It looked nothing like the one they displayed online. Nathan and Vanessa carried more than $180,000 in credit card and personal loan debt. Their Washington townhouse was 5 months behind on mortgage payments. 2 lenders had filed collection actions. The European SUV Nathan drove was scheduled for repossession. Vanessa's boutique event planning company had not produced a profit in 3 years. Nathan's consulting business existed mostly on paper. His largest client had terminated its contract 8 months earlier. They had been surviving through borrowed money, minimum payments, and transfers from accounts connected to me. Samuel found recurring withdrawals I had never noticed, small enough to avoid attention: $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. The pattern stretched back nearly 4 years. The total exceeded $90,000. I stared at the report. Nathan had not suddenly become desperate. He had been quietly feeding on my savings for years. The cruise was not an impulsive mistake. It was the final celebration before they attempted to take everything. Samuel pointed to the estimated value of my waterfront property. A developer had recently offered more than $1.4 million for a nearby house on a smaller lot. My home had no mortgage. My retirement investments, insurance accounts, and savings added substantially more. To Nathan and Vanessa, I was not a father. I was an asset package worth nearly $3 million. Their debts had reached a point where monthly survival was impossible. They needed my property. Guardianship was not about protecting me. It was their bankruptcy rescue plan. Margaret asked what outcome I wanted. She suggested that we could confront Nathan privately, demand repayment, and require him to surrender all copies of my legal documents. I shook my head. A private conversation could not repair what I had read. Nathan had stolen his mother's necklace. He had planned to manufacture evidence of dementia. He had arranged to isolate me inside a ship while using my money to entertain his wife's family. This was not a misunderstanding. It was an attack. I told Margaret I wanted every financial connection severed. No warnings, no negotiations, no opportunity for Nathan to move additional money. She studied my face for a moment, then she nodded. We began with the credit cards. Nathan possessed 2 authorized user cards attached to my account. One had been used to book the cruise, the other paid for the clothing and limousine expenses. I called the bank from Margaret's conference room. The representative asked whether I wanted to temporarily freeze the cards. I told her to permanently cancel them. She warned that several large travel authorizations were pending. I repeated the instruction. The cards became worthless within minutes. Next, we closed the joint emergency account. Nathan had removed $7,500, but more than $300,000 remained. The bank manager suggested waiting until pending transactions cleared. I refused. Every remaining dollar was transferred into a new trust account, controlled exclusively by me and administered by Margaret's firm. We changed account numbers. We added verbal passwords. We required in-person identification for unusual transfers. Nathan's electronic access ended completely. Then Margaret drafted a new will. My previous will left almost everything to Nathan. The new document left him nothing. Not the house, not the retirement accounts, not Elaine's possessions, not even the fishing boat tied to the dock. A carefully written statement explained that the exclusion was intentional and made while I was fully competent. Nathan would not be able to claim I had forgotten him. After my death, most of the estate would fund technical school scholarships for students entering electrical, welding, marine engineering, and industrial maintenance programs. Young people willing to work would receive the opportunity Nathan had wasted. The house remained the largest target. As long as I owned it personally, Nathan could still attempt emergency legal action. Even a failed guardianship claim might freeze the property for months. Margaret recommended transferring the house into the trust. I considered the option. Then I made a different decision. I wanted the house gone. Selling it meant letting go of the place Elaine and I had built together. The thought caused a pain deeper than I expected. I walked through the rooms that evening. I touched the kitchen counter, where Elaine rolled Christmas dough. I stood in the doorway, where we measured Nathan's height as he grew. I opened the back door and listened to water moving beneath the dock. Memories lived everywhere. But the house was no longer only a home. It had become bait. Nathan and Vanessa believed they could destroy my independence to possess it. I refused to spend my remaining years guarding walls from my own child. Margaret contacted a private real estate investment group that purchased high-value waterfront properties without public listings. Their representative inspected the house discreetly. He offered less than the open market might have produced, but the deal could close in 5 days. I accepted. The agreement included a temporary lease, allowing me to remain until the end of January. No sign appeared in the yard. No listing appeared online. The utilities stayed in my name. From the street, nothing changed. Legally, however, the property no longer belonged to Walter Hayes. The sale proceeds moved directly into the trust. Nathan's future guardianship petition would be aimed at a house owned by a corporation. He was preparing to steal an asset that had already vanished. While these arrangements were happening, Nathan continued sending cruise instructions. He told me what time to arrive at the airport. He reminded me that the limousine was only for the suite passengers and that I would need to take the hotel shuttle. He warned me not to enter the private retreat area because the staff might charge additional fees. Vanessa sent a packing list. At the bottom, she added a personal note. Please bring neutral-colored clothing so you don't clash with the Christmas photo theme. I read the message twice. Then I placed the phone face down and returned to packing. I did not pack for the cruise. I packed one medium suitcase for Charleston, South Carolina. Elaine and I had visited Charleston during our 25th anniversary. We stayed in a small inn near the water, walked through historic streets, and ate breakfast at the same corner cafe every morning. After she died, I never returned. Now, I rented a furnished cottage outside the city for 3 months. I wanted warm weather, quiet mornings, and enough distance to hear myself think. 3 days before departure, the cruise travel agency called. The representative wanted to confirm the passengers and final onboard spending authorizations. I informed her that the cruise had been purchased through unauthorized use of my credit card. Her professional tone changed immediately. She transferred me to the fraud department. I provided the statements, the emails, and proof that Nathan had used an authorized user card outside the limits I had established. The cruise line opened an urgent investigation. Because the reservation had been purchased as one linked group, the payment dispute affected all cabins. The agent explained that the company could suspend the booking immediately, but final cancellation would require confirmation from its security department. I told her I did not want Nathan notified early. She said the reservation would remain visible in the passenger's application until the fraud decision was completed. The decision could occur at any moment. That created an opportunity. I asked whether the cancellation could be finalized on embarkation morning. There was a pause. The agent said the timing would depend on the security team. I gave Margaret permission to communicate directly with the cruise line's legal department. By the following afternoon, an arrangement was confirmed. The cruise company would allow the passengers to arrive and present themselves for boarding. Once their identities were verified and my absence was confirmed, the reservation would be cancelled for fraudulent payment. The suite keys would never be issued. The luggage would not be loaded. Nathan would be standing at the threshold of the luxury he stole when the door closed. I felt no pleasure in imagining it, only certainty. He needed to experience the consequences in a place where excuses could not protect him. December 23 arrived under a low grey sky. My phone began vibrating at 6 in the morning. Nathan sent a message asking whether I had reached the airport. I did not respond. At 7, he called. I allowed it to ring. At 8, Vanessa sent 3 question marks, followed by a warning that the cruise would not delay departure because I was confused. At 9, Nathan left a voicemail. His tone was irritated rather than concerned. He said everyone was already at the Miami terminal and that I was embarrassing him. He ordered me to call immediately. I was not in Virginia. I was sitting on the porch of my rented cottage outside Charleston with a cup of coffee and Elaine's photograph beside me. The sky was clear there. Sunlight touched the tops of the trees. A soft breeze moved through the tall grass near the water. Margaret had provided a secure phone dedicated to legal communications. The cruise line would contact that number when the family reached the boarding desk. At 10:42, the phone rang. A security supervisor informed me that Nathan's group had checked in. All 11 passengers were present. They had arrived in a hired black shuttle carrying more than 20 pieces of luggage. Their passports had been verified. The supervisor asked one final time whether I authorized the cruise charge. I said no. He asked whether Nathan had permission to use my card for any amount close to $40,000. I said no. He asked whether I wished to withdraw the fraud complaint. I said no. The supervisor confirmed that the linked reservation was now cancelled. Every cabin, every dining package, every excursion, every priority boarding privilege. The cancellation occurred at 10:46 in the morning. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then my old phone began ringing. Nathan. Vanessa. Nathan again. An unknown number. Vanessa's mother. Nathan. The calls came so quickly that the screen barely went dark between them. I turned the phone over. At 11:17, Margaret's secure line rang. Nathan had somehow obtained the number from the cruise company's legal notice. I answered. He did not say hello. What did you do? His voice echoed through the terminal. Behind him, I heard announcements, rolling luggage, and hundreds of passengers moving toward security. I asked what he meant. Nathan exploded. He said the cruise line had cancelled the reservation and refused to release their boarding passes. He claimed the manager was accusing them of fraudulent payment. He demanded that I call immediately and explain the misunderstanding. I allowed him to speak. He said Vanessa's parents were standing beside him. He said everyone had flown to Miami. He said their luggage was piled in the terminal. He said the ship was leaving in less than 3 hours. Then, he returned to his familiar tone, the commanding voice, the voice he used whenever he believed fear would make me obedient. He told me to stop behaving irrationally. He said my confusion had gone too far. He warned me that if I did not restore the reservation, he would have no choice but to take control of my affairs. I looked at the sunlight reflecting across the water. There is no misunderstanding, I said. The line became quiet. I told him I had reported the charge because it was unauthorized. He attempted to laugh. The sound came out thin. He said I had agreed to the family vacation. I reminded him that he never asked. He claimed we had discussed it. I asked him to identify the date of that conversation. He could not. Nathan lowered his voice. He said we could argue later. For now, I needed to call the cruise line and authorize payment. I told him the cards were cancelled. He stopped breathing for a moment. Then he asked what I meant. I explained that both authorized user cards had been permanently closed. The joint emergency account was also closed. Every remaining dollar had been moved into a legally protected trust. Nathan began speaking faster. He said I was making dangerous financial decisions. He said someone must have manipulated me. He asked whether Margaret Sloan was involved. The mention of her name revealed how much he had already investigated. I asked why he sounded afraid of my attorney. He did not answer. Instead, he ordered me to tell him where I was. I said I was exactly where I wanted to be. Nathan's voice became colder. He told me the cruise incident proved I was mentally unstable. He said canceling a family Christmas vacation while people were boarding was not normal behavior. He threatened to file an emergency guardianship petition the moment he returned to Virginia. I waited until he finished. Then I quoted Vanessa's email. I repeated the line about hiding my cabin card and recording me when I could not open the door. Nathan said nothing. I repeated the plan to tell crew members that I had dementia. The sounds of the terminal continued behind him, but his breathing became the loudest thing on the call. I told him I had read every message. The separate cabin, the private family portraits, the instructions to keep me away from the suite deck, the plan to create false evidence, the guardianship hearing, the waterfront property valuation. Nathan began stammering. He said the messages were jokes. He said Vanessa became dramatic when stressed. He said nobody truly intended to hurt me. I asked whether stealing $90,000 over 4 years was also a joke. The line went silent again. I listed the transfers Samuel had identified. I told him I knew about the $180,000 in debt. I knew the townhouse mortgage was in default. I knew the vehicles were facing repossession. I knew his consulting business had almost no income. His public image had depended on my accounts. The cruise terminal was merely the place where the image finally collapsed. Nathan whispered that he could explain. I asked him to explain Elaine's necklace. His voice broke. For several seconds, all I heard was the terminal announcement asking passengers to keep travel documents ready. I described the empty velvet case. I told him the security camera had been disconnected during his visit. I informed him that Margaret had already contacted the jeweler who purchased the necklace through a private resale broker. The transaction was connected to Vanessa. Nathan began crying. Not loudly. It was a low, desperate sound. He said he only borrowed the necklace because they needed money to secure the cruise deposit. He promised to replace it after they sold the house. There it was. The truth. They intended to sell my home. I asked how he planned to sell a house that belonged to me. He did not answer. I answered for him. He planned to have me declared incompetent. He planned to use the authority I had signed during my hospital visit. He planned to move me into a facility, control my accounts, and sell the property before anyone understood what had happened. Nathan said Vanessa created most of the plan. He said he had never felt comfortable with it. He attempted to separate himself from the conspiracy he had helped design. I reminded him that his name appeared on every message. I told him a reluctant thief was still a thief. His desperation changed direction. He began begging. He called me Dad. For years, he had usually called me Walter when speaking around Vanessa's family. He said Dad now because he needed the word to unlock something. He pleaded for enough money to purchase replacement tickets on another cruise. When I refused, he asked for money to cover the flights and hotel. He said Vanessa's parents were furious. He said everyone was staring at them. He said the terminal staff had called security. I told him he had spent years designing my public humiliation. He wanted me hidden in a windowless cabin because my clothes embarrassed him. Now he stood in a crowded terminal, surrounded by the people he had tried to impress, and the truth was visible to all of them. He was not a wealthy businessman. He was a bankrupt man, using his father's stolen credit. Nathan asked whether I understood what the cancellation would do to his marriage. I said a marriage held together by stolen money had already ended. Then I informed him that the waterfront house had been sold. He did not react immediately. Perhaps his mind refused to accept the words. What house? He finally asked. I told him the house outside Norfolk, the house he planned to take, the house Elaine and I had paid for. The house no longer belonged to me. Nathan shouted that I was lying. I explained that a private sale had closed days earlier. The deed was already transferred. The proceeds were inside the trust. He began demanding information about the buyer. I told him it did not matter. He said the house was his inheritance. I corrected him. The house had never belonged to him. An inheritance is a gift given freely after someone dies. It is not property a child is entitled to steal while the parent is still breathing. Nathan said I could not do this to him. I asked whether he heard the irony. He had planned to take my freedom, my home, and my savings. Now he believed canceling a stolen vacation was cruelty. The noise behind him suddenly increased. A man's voice instructed Nathan to step away from the boarding counter. Nathan protested. Another voice warned him not to raise his voice at staff. I heard Vanessa shouting nearby. He demanded the phone. A struggle followed. Then her voice exploded through the speaker. She called me a selfish, vindictive old man. She accused me of destroying Christmas for 11 innocent people. I asked which of those innocent people had offered to pay for their own cabins. She ignored the question. Vanessa said Nathan had legal authority over my finances. I told her the authority had been revoked. She said they would challenge the revocation. I told her my competency evaluation was already filed with the court. Her anger paused. I described the psychiatrist, the neurologist, the memory testing, and the written determination that I was fully capable of managing every part of my life. I invited her to stand before a judge and argue that protecting my money from two people carrying $180,000 in consumer debt was evidence of insanity. Vanessa threatened to send police to my house. I told her the house was empty. She demanded my location. I refused. Then she made the mistake of threatening me directly. She said that when they returned, they would make sure I spent the rest of my life inside the worst care facility they could find. She said nobody would believe an old man over his successful son and daughter-in-law. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had experienced in weeks. Vanessa stopped speaking. I told her the conversation was being recorded through Margaret's legal line. I explained that every threat she had just made would be preserved with the emails, bank records, property documents, and evidence surrounding Elaine's stolen necklace. Her voice changed. The fury lost some of its strength. I informed her that a criminal complaint for elder financial exploitation and theft had already been prepared. Whether it became an active prosecution would depend on the authorities, not on her ability to intimidate me. She accused me of trying to send my own son to prison. I corrected her again. Nathan's choices had created that possibility. I had merely stopped protecting him from the consequences. Vanessa tried a softer approach. She said families sometimes made mistakes. She claimed the cruise had been intended as a surprise for me. I looked down at the printed itinerary beside my chair, a windowless cabin near the laundry room, separate meals, no family photographs, a plan to hide my key and record my confusion. I told her, some surprises revealed exactly what people believed you were worth. She began crying. I did not know whether the tears were real. I no longer needed to decide. I ended the call. Back at the Miami terminal, the cancellation spread through the family like fire. I learned the details later from official reports and a brief description provided by the cruise line's attorney. Vanessa's father, Richard, demanded to speak with the senior terminal manager. He presented himself as an important businessman and threatened legal action. The manager showed him the payment cancellation notice. The booking had been purchased through disputed funds. No passenger in the group had provided an alternative payment method capable of covering the reservation. Richard turned to Nathan and asked whether the money belonged to him. Nathan could not answer. Vanessa's sister attempted to pay for one cabin using her own card. The transaction was declined because her available limit was too low. Another relative suggested splitting the payment among multiple cards. The cruise company refused. The original linked reservation had been cancelled, and the suites had already been released to a waiting list. Their dream vacation vanished while the ship remained visible through the terminal windows. Passengers with valid tickets continued walking past them. Families smiled for photographs. Children carried Christmas hats. Porters rolled luggage toward the ship. Nathan and Vanessa stood beside a mountain of bags that would never leave the terminal. The cruise line's security staff instructed them to clear the boarding area. Vanessa refused. She shouted that the cabins had already been paid for. The terminal manager replied that they had been paid for with money under active fraud dispute. Several passengers began recording the argument on their phones. The public image Vanessa had spent years manufacturing collapsed in real time. Her matching luggage, designer coat, and carefully coordinated family outfits no longer represented success. They became props in a humiliation nobody could hide. Richard demanded that Nathan arrange a private yacht instead. Nathan had no money. He opened his wallet. Between cash and debit cards, he possessed less than $200 in usable funds. The limousine company required payment for the return trip from the terminal. The card Nathan provided was declined. Vanessa's parents eventually paid for transportation to an airport hotel, but they refused to include Nathan and Vanessa in the booking. The family divided. Blame moved quickly. Vanessa blamed Nathan for failing to secure control of my money. Nathan blamed Vanessa for insisting on the suites, the photography package, and the expensive guest list. Richard blamed both of them for deceiving the entire family. Diane cried because she had already posted photographs announcing the cruise. Vanessa's sisters demanded repayment for airfare and clothing. The Christmas celebration became an argument in the terminal parking lot. By noon, Nathan and Vanessa were standing alone beside their luggage. The ship departed that afternoon without them. From the porch in Charleston, I watched a small sailboat move across the inlet. I did not celebrate. Revenge had never been the true goal. I wanted safety. I wanted control over my own life. I wanted the constant fear of Nathan's next request to end. For years, I had mistaken giving money for giving love. Each time I rescued him, I prevented him from facing reality. Each time I ignored disrespect, I taught him that disrespect carried no cost. I had not protected my son. I had trained him to believe I could be consumed without limit. 3 days after Christmas, Margaret called. Nathan had filed an emergency petition claiming I was mentally unstable and financially reckless. The petition described the cancelled cruise, the sale of the house, and my temporary relocation as evidence of a psychological breakdown. Nathan requested immediate authority over my accounts. The hearing occurred the following week. I attended remotely from Margaret's office in Charleston. Nathan appeared in a courtroom in Virginia with a lawyer he could barely afford. Vanessa sat behind him wearing dark glasses. Their attorney argued that a rational 70-year-old man would not suddenly sell his longtime home, cancel a family vacation, and move to another state. Margaret responded with evidence. She presented my competency reports. She presented the unauthorized $40,000 charge. She presented the repeated withdrawals. She presented the emails discussing fabricated confusion. She presented the instructions to hide my cabin key. She presented the property valuation message. She presented the revocation of power of attorney signed before Nathan filed anything. Finally, she presented the recording of Vanessa threatening to place me in the worst facility she could find. The judge listened without interruption. Nathan's attorney attempted to characterize the emails as private jokes. The judge asked whether planning a guardianship hearing was also a joke. The attorney had no useful answer. The petition was dismissed. The court found no evidence that I lacked capacity. Instead, the judge referred several documents to investigators responsible for financial exploitation of older adults. Nathan entered the courthouse, hoping to gain control of my life. He left under scrutiny for attempting to steal it. The financial collapse followed quickly. Without access to my accounts, Nathan could not make the overdue mortgage payments. The townhouse entered foreclosure. The SUV was repossessed from outside Vanessa's office. Her event planning business closed after suppliers demanded unpaid balances. Their credit cards stopped working. Collection notices arrived daily. The luxury life they displayed online disappeared. Vanessa deleted photographs. Nathan stopped posting entirely. Within 2 months, they filed for bankruptcy. Margaret kept me informed only when necessary. I did not search for them online. I did not ask mutual acquaintances for gossip. The destruction of their image was not entertainment. It was the natural result of removing the money that had been holding it up. The investigation into Elaine's necklace produced an unexpected result. The jeweler who purchased it had not yet resold the piece. Nathan and Vanessa had accepted far less than its actual value because they needed immediate cash. Through Margaret, I repurchased the necklace. When the green velvet case was returned to me, I carried it to the waterfront near Charleston. I opened the lid beneath the evening light. The sapphire looked exactly as I remembered. Deep blue, quiet, beautiful without trying to impress anyone. I thought about Elaine. I imagined what she would say about everything that happened. She would grieve for Nathan. So did I. Beneath the anger and disappointment, part of me still remembered the boy who sat on my shoulders during harbor festivals. The boy who waited near the window for me to return from night shifts. The boy who once built his mother a wooden jewelry box in school and painted it bright yellow. That child had existed, but love for who someone used to be could not require surrendering to who they had become. I placed the necklace back inside the case. It would remain part of Elaine's legacy. It would never again become fuel for Nathan's vanity. By February, I returned to Virginia briefly to remove the last personal belongings from the house. The investment company planned to renovate before reselling it. I walked through each empty room alone. The furniture was gone. The photographs were packed. Without our belongings, the house seemed smaller. I entered Nathan's old bedroom. The marks showing his childhood height remained inside the closet frame. Age 7. Age 9. Age 12. At 15, he had drawn a line himself and written, "Almost taller than Dad." I ran my finger across the faded pencil. For a moment, grief overwhelmed me. Not grief for the money. Not grief for the house. Grief for the family I believed we had. I had spent years trying to preserve something that no longer existed. The memories were real. The present was also real. Pretending otherwise would not restore the past. I walked to the dock one final time. The river moved steadily beneath the boards. Ships passed in the distance, just as they had throughout my entire adult life. I remembered my first day at the shipyard. I was a frightened teenager wearing borrowed boots. An older electrician named Frank handed me a voltage tester and told me never to trust a wire simply because someone claimed the power was off. "Test it yourself," he said. "Assumptions get people killed." I had followed that rule around machinery. I had failed to follow it around family. I trusted Nathan because he was my son. I ignored the evidence because the truth hurt too much. The $40,000 cruise charge finally forced me to test the connection. The system was live. The danger was real, and cutting the power saved my life. I locked the back door and handed the keys to the property manager. There was no dramatic farewell, no final speech. A house did not contain Elaine. A house did not contain my identity. Those things traveled with me. I returned to Charleston and purchased a smaller home near the water. It had 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a narrow porch facing the marsh. I bought used furniture. I planted rosemary near the steps because Elaine loved the smell. I joined a volunteer program teaching basic electrical skills at a community trade center. The students reminded me why honest work mattered. Some were young parents. Some were veterans. Some had spent years being told they were not intelligent because traditional classrooms did not suit them. I taught them how to read diagrams, test circuits, and respect electricity. Most importantly, I taught them that skill created independence. Money could disappear, image could collapse, but nobody could repossess knowledge earned through discipline. The trust established by Margaret funded its first scholarships that spring. 6 students received tuition, tools, and safety equipment. None of them knew my name. I preferred it that way. Nathan had spent his adult life demanding rewards for being my son. These students asked only for the chance to work. Helping them transformed the meaning of the money. My savings were no longer a pile of assets waiting for someone to steal. They became opportunities. One afternoon, Margaret called to tell me Nathan had delivered a letter to her office. Then another. Then several more. He apologized. He said bankruptcy had changed him. He claimed he understood the pain he caused. Vanessa had apparently left him and moved in with her parents. He was living in a rented room and working for a small insurance company. The letter asked for a meeting. Margaret offered to send me a scanned copy. I declined. A week later, another letter arrived. This one included a photograph of Nathan as a child, standing beside Elaine on the dock. He had written on the back, "Please remember who I was." I understood the manipulation. He wanted the photograph to reach the part of me still mourning that boy. For several nights, I considered responding. I imagined meeting him in a public place. I imagined hearing an apology. I imagined rebuilding some form of relationship. Then I asked myself a simple question. Was Nathan sorry because he understood what he had done, or because he had lost access to what I owned? The answer was inside his letters. He wrote extensively about his suffering, the lost house, the bankruptcy, the divorce, the humiliation. He wrote very little about my fear. He did not mention the plan to manufacture dementia. He did not mention the nursing facility. He did not mention the years of secret withdrawals. He described the stolen necklace as a desperate financial decision. He still softened every action to protect himself from its true meaning. His apology was not accountability. It was another request. This time, he wanted emotional access before attempting financial access again. I instructed Margaret to return future letters unopened. She asked whether I was certain. I told her boundaries meant nothing if they disappeared the moment the person outside them became uncomfortable. I had spent 70 years learning that lesson. I was not going to forget it now. Christmas arrived again 11 months later. I woke before sunrise and walked to the porch. The air was cool but gentle. Lights from neighboring houses reflected across the marsh. For most of my life, Christmas had meant responsibility. Extra shifts, bills, travel, trying to prevent arguments, trying to purchase happiness for people who always wanted more. That morning, I made coffee and opened a small package delivered by one of the scholarship students. Inside was a simple wooden plaque. The student had burned a message into the surface. "Thank you for helping me build a future with my own hands." I placed the plaque beside Elaine's photograph. Then I cooked breakfast for several students who had nowhere else to go for the holiday. They arrived carrying grocery store pies, homemade biscuits, and more food than my little table could hold. Nobody wore designer clothing. Nobody photographed the plates. Nobody discussed property values. They laughed loudly, helped wash dishes, and listened when I spoke. For the first time in years, Christmas did not feel like a performance. It felt like peace. At noon, my phone remained silent. No demands, no accusations, no emergency payments. I walked outside and watched white birds cross the sky. Some people would say I was cruel for canceling the cruise while Nathan and Vanessa were boarding. They might argue that I should have confronted them privately or given them one more chance, but Nathan had already received years of chances. Every loan was a chance. Every forgiven insult was a chance. Every unexplained withdrawal was a chance. Every time I remained silent, he received another opportunity to stop. He used each opportunity to move closer to taking everything. The cruise terminal was not where our relationship broke. It was where I finally stopped pretending it remained intact. I did not destroy Nathan's life. I removed my money from it. The difference revealed the truth. Without my accounts, his lifestyle collapsed because it had never belonged to him. Without my silence, his image collapsed because it depended on hiding what he was doing. Without my house, his rescue plan collapsed because it depended on removing me from my own life. He had constructed an entire future around the assumption that I would remain weak. He was wrong. Aging had changed my body. My knees hurt in cold weather. My hands were not as strong as they once were. I occasionally forgot where I placed my reading glasses. But weakness was not the same as age. Weakness was surrendering your judgment because someone called their greed love. Weakness was accepting humiliation because conflict felt frightening. Weakness was allowing your own child to erase you while you were still alive. I had finally understood that protecting myself did not make me a bad father. It made me a human being. The deepest betrayal was not the $40,000 charge. Money could be restored. The deepest betrayal was Nathan's belief that my life had become less valuable than his comfort. He looked at my age and saw an opportunity. He looked at my grief and saw leverage. He looked at my love and saw an account without a limit. Canceling the cruise closed that account forever. Sometimes people do not understand your value while they benefit from your sacrifice. They understand it only when the sacrifice stops. Nathan believed my support was permanent because it had always been available. He mistook consistency for weakness. He thought the father who paid tuition, covered debts, and forgave insults would also surrender his home and freedom. He learned otherwise at a boarding counter in Miami. While the ship prepared to sail, every illusion he had built became visible. The sweets were not his. The money was not his. The authority was not his. The future he had planned was not his. He stood among expensive luggage with nothing he had honestly earned. That was not revenge. That was truth. Today, Elaine's sapphire necklace rests in a secure place inside my new home. Beside it is the wooden plaque from the student whose education the trust supported. One object represents the life Elaine and I built. The other represents what that life will continue to create. Nathan wanted our savings to maintain an image. I chose to use them to build futures. That decision brought me more satisfaction than any luxury cruise could have provided. I still think about my son. There are mornings when I wonder whether he has truly changed. There are nights when an old memory rises unexpectedly and leaves me staring into the dark. Freedom does not erase grief. It simply prevents grief from controlling every decision. I can love the child Nathan once was, while refusing access to the man he became. Both truths can exist together. That is what boundaries are. They are not hatred. They are not hatred. They are the distance required for truth to survive. The Christmas cruise disappeared over the horizon without Nathan and Vanessa aboard. For them, it became the day their false life collapsed. For me, it became the day my real life began again. The lesson is not that every family conflict should end in revenge. The lesson is that love without respect becomes exploitation, forgiveness without accountability becomes permission, and generosity without boundaries attracts people who mistake kindness for an endless supply they are entitled to consume. Your age does not erase your rights. Your children do not automatically own your property. Your family name does not give anyone permission to steal your savings, control your medical decisions, or remove you from the life you built. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is close the account, cancel the reservation, lock the door, and allow other adults to face the consequences of their own choices. Nathan believed I ruined Christmas. In reality, I saved the rest of my life. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me whether Walter made the right decision when he cancelled the $40,000 cruise while his family was boarding. Subscribe to Mark Cole for more powerful stories about betrayal, courage, justice, and people who finally learn to stand up for themselves.